Okay, good afternoon everyone and welcome to this afternoon's webinar, which is designed to introduce you to the UK Data Service. My name's Deborah and I'm one of the user support team at the UK Data Service. So this afternoon I'm going to introduce who we are in case you're not familiar with us, and then I'll go through some of the kinds of data that we hold. I'm going to touch very briefly on finding and accessing data, although I won't go into too much detail because there is a separate webinar on that in a couple of weeks' time. And then I'll have a look at some of the online resources and where you can find further help if you need it. Now, hopefully, at the end of the webinar, we should have plenty of time for any questions. So if there's anything you want to know, do type your questions in the chat box, which you should see on the right-hand side of your screen. And we'll try and answer as many of those at the end of the webinar as we can. Okay, so who are we? So the UK Data Service is a comprehensive resource and we are funded by the ESRC. And our primary aim is to provide users with seamless and flexible access to a wide range of data resources so that we can facilitate high quality social and economic research and also education. And all of our activities stem from this one aim. Here at the UK Data Archive, based in Essex, we work with colleagues across the UK to deliver the UK Data Service, and we collaborate with research data experts across the country. This year, just out of interest, the Archive is celebrating its 50th anniversary. Now, the UK Data Service provides a single point of access to a whole host of different social science data. But as well as that, we provide support training, guidance, webinars like today's, and also a whole host of face-to-face events throughout the year. This is what the homepage for our website looks like. I would, if you haven't already, invite you to spend some time having a look through the website. There's all sorts of different sections and resources you can find. And you can do that through using the tabs at the top of the web page. We're going to talk about some of those resources towards the end of the webinar, but do in your own time have a good look through the website. So who are we for? Well, a lot of our regular users are from the higher education sector, so that's staff, researchers and students. But contrary to popular beliefs, anyone and everyone can register with us. And we also have a large number of users from other sectors such as local and national government and charities, etc. Currently we have around 23,000 users across the world, and they are responsible between them for around 60,000 data downloads every year. Now, our data come from a variety of sources, so we don't actually collect the data ourselves. The data owners will deposit the datasets with us, and we curate, preserve and catalogue them, and we're allowed to disseminate them under license from these original data owners. And these data owners include national statistical authorities such as the Office for National Statistics, government departments including the Home Office and the Department for Work and Pensions, for example, intergovernmental organisations such as the International Monetary Fund, research institutions such as the Institute for Social and Economic Research and the Centre for Longitudinal Studies, and also increasingly individual researchers who are funded by the ESRC are now obliged to deposit their data with us. Now we have just over 7,000 datasets, and new datasets are being added all the time, and they are of a number of different types. Now today I'm going to focus just on the 4 key types of data today, and that's the 4 you can see on your screen. So that's survey microdata, international macrodata, census data and qualitative and mixed methods. So let's start off with survey microdata. Now these are individual or household level data which have been anonymised to prevent disclosure. And by that we mean that prevents any individuals or households from being identified from the data. Now these data sets need to be analysed using statistical analysis packages like SPSS or Stata, or increasingly more and more people are using R, for example. Now these are very flexible kinds of data, so they allow you to produce your own tables, isolate your own populations of interest, and have a look at multiple attributions and the relationships between them. And you can produce a number of different types of outputs with these data. So here you can see a fairly simple cross-tabulation which looks at BMI, or body mass index, by age group from the 2014 Health Survey for England. And here's the same data, but it's presented in a different way, so you can see how flexible the data are. Some of the most commonly used survey microdata are the UK surveys. Now these are mainly about individuals or households. They're nationally representative, and as such they have very large sample sizes. Now they are very high quality data because they're generally produced by very experienced research organisations such as the Office for National Statistics, who have got many years of experience in sampling, data collection, etc. I mentioned that they have very large sample sizes, so for example the labour force survey interviews around 60,000 people every quarter. So you can see they really are very large. These datasets are repeated cross-sectional surveys, so a lot of them are repeated every year or most years. But each time they're run they use a new sample of people. But they often use the same questions each time they're run, and this way it allows us to track trends in the population over time. Now these surveys cover many topics including health, work, crime, for example, and a lot of them will also include multiple topics. These are some of the key UK surveys that we hold, and by far the most widely used one out of this selection is the quarterly labour force survey. So let's have a look at a couple of the data sets just to give you a flavour of what we hold. So we have a number of data sets from the citizenship survey, and this covers a whole range of topics, and you can see quite an extensive list here. And that's everything from people's identity, how they feel about their local community, through to what they think about rights and responsibilities and how they mix with other people. There are also some questions on violent extremism, although some of these questions, due to the sensitivity, are only available through a secure access version of the data. So you might want to have a look at something like this. So you can see from this stacked bar chart how satisfied people are with their local area as a place to live by how strongly they feel they belong to their local area. And you can see that people who feel very strongly that they belong to that area are much more likely to be satisfied with their local area. Now this is a relatively new data set which has been deposited in recent months, and it's quite an interesting one. And it's called the Long-Term Trajectories of Crime in the UK. Now this particular data deposit collects data from a number of different cross-sectional surveys, and that's the Crime Survey for England and Wales, the British Social Attitude Survey, the British Elections Survey. And it amalgamates information from all three of these surveys. And what it does is allows us to explore, for example, how the changes in economic and social policies have resulted in changes, or not, as the case may be, in patterns of crime, victimisation and anxieties. And you can see a couple of other examples of what this data set would allow you to explore. One of the unique things really about this particular data set is that it includes a wide range of individual level data, and that covers the topics that you can see on your screen. So everything from social and political attitudes, any fear and perceptions people have of crime, housing tenure, all this sort of thing. But it also includes aggregate level data as well. So for example, you can have a look at the number of police officers in England and Wales, and you can have a look at recorded crime statistics, as you can just see on this basic graph now. So that's a really exciting new data set which, as I say, has been deposited fairly recently. Now let's have a look at a different kind of survey microdata, and that's the longitudinal, or sometimes referred to as panel studies. They're also individual or household level, and they're repeated again, quite often yearly, although some are repeated less often. However, this time they follow the same individuals over time. So each time they're run, they will go back and interview the same people. Obviously, there is a problem with people dropping out over time, so every few years new respondents may be added just to keep the sample sizes at a good level. And because we're following the same individuals, this allows us to have a look at change at an individual level. So, for example, we can identify exactly who it is that's moving in and out of the labour market and what sort of factors might be influencing those moves. Again, we've got a whole host of different longitudinal studies, and you can see some of the key ones here. And again, I want to just introduce a couple of these just to give you a flavour of what we have. One of the main ones is the British Household Panel Survey. Now, this followed members of 5,500 households who were first sampled in 1991, and they were interviewed every year up until 2008. Now, this is a multi-topic survey, so it will include a whole host of information such as people's labour market behaviour, their income. There's also some values and attitudinal behaviour as well as health, education, etc. But because information is collected on every single household member, it also allows us to have a look at these things at a household level as well. Now, Understanding Society began in 2019, and it really aims to expand and build upon the BHPS. The sample size here was expanded, so now we have up to 100,000 individuals, and that includes the original BHPS sample members. So that particular group of people we've now been able to follow for over 25 years. And this study really allows us to look at change at the individual and household level, so we can have a look at what people experience, what key circumstances and events. And we can have a look at those as they happen. And we can also have a look at how these households and individuals respond to policy changes, for example. And again, like the BHPS, this is a multi-topic survey, and many of the questions you will see between the two surveys remain the same, although some additional topics have been included. So you've got everything from employment and earnings, parenting and childcare, family networks, etc. Now, a slightly different type of longitudinal study is the cohort studies. Now, again, these are run regularly, although they're not every year, they're run slightly less frequently, and they do follow the same people over time. But this time, the sample is made up of people who were born within a specific week in a specific year. And we have three of the main cohort studies currently, and that's the 1958, the 1970 and the Millennium cohort studies. There is also a data set which combines the 1958 and 1970 cohorts, and that's designed specifically to allow the studies of twins. Now, because all of these cohort studies relate to different decades, we can have a look at generational change with these. They have a health and medical focus, although there is a lot of information collected about social and economic circumstances as well. And here you can see the different data collection sweeps for each of the cohort studies to date. So you can see that they're not followed every year, they're followed at key points. And I just wanted to show you an example of a case study which has used the National Child Development Study, which is the 1958 cohort. And this study looks at the adverse childhood experiences and how that influenced people's risk of experiencing early death. And what the study did was isolate some adverse childhood experiences, such as having time spent in care, physical neglect, etc. And the results are quite interesting. They found that women who had experienced one particular adverse experience had a 66% increased risk of an early death. So that's quite an interesting study, and you can find that on our website if you want to have a look at more of the detail. But that just shows you exactly what we can do with these types of studies. Now, one last type of microdata that I want to mention very briefly is the cross-national surveys. I'm not going to go into any more detail, but you can see a list of some of the studies that we have, and you can find all sorts of information about these studies on our website. But the point with these, the real benefit of these, is that they are designed to allow you to make comparisons across different countries. And that can be for topics such as education or income, for example. Okay, so let's move on to a different type of data. So we focused on microdata, so that's data at the individual level. And hopefully we've given you an idea of the wide range of data that we hold and what you could do with it. So let's have a look at some of the aggregate data or macro data sources that we have. Now these are different in nature, so they generally consist of statistics or counts. They come generally in tabular format, and the units are geographical areas. Now people can use these just as they are. They can also use them for further analysis, so to have a look at trends and again relationships between different attributes. And they're also quite often used as contextual information alongside individual level data. Now the first set of aggregate data is the international macro data. Now these are data that have been aggregated to a country or regional level. These are time series data, and depending on the particular database, they can be available annually, quarterly or monthly, and they're updated really very regularly. Now these types of data are typically produced by the intergovernmental organisations such as the International Monetary Fund. Now a lot of this data is still only available to staff and students from the higher and further education institutions, but increasingly more and more of these data sources are being opened up, such as the World Bank databases. So these are becoming more widely available for all. Now all of the aggregate data banks, as I mentioned, contain time series data, so collectively they chart over 50 years of global social and economic change. And you can see a list of some of the topics that are included. So they're quite wide-ranging, so you can have a look at employment through to human development indicators, for example. And these data sources are particularly popular with economics students, for example. And here's a map which just shows you one of the things you can do. And this map is produced using our UKDS .stat interface, which is something that you can use for your own web browser. And it's really very simple to produce, and yet, as you can see, it's very effective. And here you can see the total life expectancy in years across the globe for 2014. So I want to ask you what you think about life expectancy. So what country do you think has seen the greatest increase in total life expectancy between 2009 and 2014? So we've got a fairly even split, but the most frequent answers are the Central African Republic and Bolivia. In fact, actually, the correct answer is Zimbabwe. Now, their life expectancy was 47.6 years in 2009, and it's actually increased to 57.5 years by 2014. So that's a really good increase of 9.9 years, which shows great progress. Just for interest, in 2014, the lowest life expectancy was found in Swaziland, whilst the highest was in Hong Kong. So that just gives you an indication of some of the things that you can find out using these data. So let's move on to census data now. Now there are a number of different types of census data which we'll discuss in a second. But basically the census has a very long history, and it goes back to 1801, and it's something that takes place every 10 years. And we provide access to and user support for the last 5 of these. Now, census data is considered to be the gold standard because it aims to cover 100% of the population, and as such, it's used for baseline statistics by a lot of different organisations. So, for example, the ONS use it to calculate their mid-year population estimates. Now, the census contains detailed combinations of characteristics, and it's also available in a great number of different geographies, and some of them go down to very small areas, as we'll see in a few moments. So this makes it possible to reliably compare different areas, which is what makes the census data so unique. Now, the census data itself can be divided into different outputs, such as aggregate, boundary, flow and microdata, and we'll have a look at each of those. Now, most of the data are open now. However, there may still be some restrictions on some elements of the census data that we hold. And this is because the licenses under which we hold these data may be restricted to those in higher education. So do bear that in mind, but get in touch with us if you need any advice. So the topics vary every census, although there are some standard questions which pop up each time. In the most recent one, which is 2011, we have new topics appeared such as national identity and whether someone has a second home, for example. Now, the first type of census data is aggregate data, so we know that these are counts of people or households, and these are the groups that have particular combinations and characteristics for an area. For example, you could, if you wanted, isolate out the number of females aged between 25 and 49 who are married, have a mortgage, and record themselves as having bad or very bad health in the county of Somerset. So you can see that actually you can get very, very detailed and very specific with the populations you can look at. If you're interested in using the aggregate census data, then you do that using our Infuse interface, which you can see on your screens. And you can access the 2001 and 2011 census data. Now, this interface is something that you use just within your own web browser, so you don't need any specialist software. And it's quite simple, so you just pick the topics that you're interested in from the list of options on the left-hand side, and you just carry on specifying your parameters, and then you can produce tables such as this one, for example. And this is a table that was generated using Infuse, showing the number of households who are deprived in between 1 to 4 dimensions by the government office regions. And then you could use these counts to calculate, for example, the percentage of households that are deprived. From these counts, I've been able to work out that the South East has the lowest proportion of households who are deprived, whilst the largest proportion are in London and the North East. Now, we provide access to a number of different census boundaries for a range of geographies, and you can see some examples on your screen here. And this is available from 1981 up until the most recent census. So the first map you can see on the top left-hand side of your screen is the largest, and that's the government office regions. And then as you move across the screen, you can see the geographical areas get smaller and smaller until we get to the final one in the bottom right-hand corner, which is the super output areas. And this particular example is the Wirral. And these geographies are available in a wide range of GIS formats. And here's a visual example again of how you can use the data. So this particular example shows you how the number of people who define themselves as Christian has declined in England and Wales between 2001 and 2011. Now, as I mentioned, there are a variety of different boundary data tools, and you can see the list here, and all of these are available on our website. And you can use these for different types of mapping exercises. So I should say here that the data, as I mentioned, are not all under the Open Government Licence, so do be aware that there may be some restrictions. Okay, so the third type of census data is flow data, and this is a very specific type of aggregate data. And this shows where people are moving from a point of origin to a point of destination. And there are two types, so that's commuting between their place of residence and their place of work. And the second is migration, and that's derived from the place of residence on census day compared with the usual residence in the previous year. And you would explore these data using another of our online resources called Wicked. And again, here's just an example of a table which shows how people are moving between the different regions. And this is an interface again that you use through your own web browser, so there's no specialist software required. Now the final type of census data is microdata. Now these look very much like the UK surveys and longitudinal surveys that we looked at earlier, but the data in this case has come from the census. And they're individual level data, which again have been anonymised to prevent disclosure. And they're released in data sets which are known as sample of anonymised records, or SARS for short. And the samples consist of between 1 to 5% of the population, depending on the data set. Now these look, as I say, like any other data set you would get from a UK survey. So you'd need to use something like SPSS or Stata to analyse them. But again, they're highly flexible. So as we saw earlier, you can produce your own tables and have a look at specific populations. Currently, there are SARS datasets available for 1991 onwards. Okay, so we focused on quantitative or numeric data so far. So I just want to finish this section by having a look at the qualitative data that we hold. Now, all of the data so far has been very statistical or numerical in nature, whereas qualitative data contains many different types of data, and much of that is non-numeric. So for example, excuse me, that seemed to have moved without me asking it to. So you can see that some of the formats are things like interview transcripts, diaries, observation notes, etc. And we also have a number of collections which will have mixed data, so they'll have some qualitative data alongside some quantitative or numeric data. And here's just a few examples. And you can find many, many more by searching our Discover catalogue for qualitative data. So that hopefully will give you a flavour of the data that we hold. Now, as I mentioned, we have over 7,000 datasets, so please do spend some time exploring our holdings. If you want to access any of the datasets, you will need to be registered with us, so we'll talk about that briefly now. Now, the way you register varies depending on which sector you are currently based in. So if you are at a UK university, either as staff or student, then you simply register with us using your own institutional username and password. Now, registration is a very simple process. It will take you just a few moments. If you're not at a UK university, don't panic. You can still register with us. But what you'll need to do is to apply for a UK Data Archive username and password. So the process is pretty much identical, but you just have that one extra step. And you can find guidance on the registration process and also the link that you need to select on our website. Now, the login register icon, which you can see in this example on the top right-hand corner, will appear on every screen. So wherever you are on our website, you'll be able to access that link very easily. And as I say, it's just a simple process to register with us. But if you do need any help, then please do get in touch with us. Now I'm just going to finish up by having a look at some of the useful resources and where to find further help. Now, if you are brand new to the UK Data Service, then I would highly recommend our Advice for New Users webpage. And we have all sorts of different resources that you can find here, so you can find advice on how to find data with our search application, our Discover search tool. And as I mentioned earlier, there is a separate webinar coming up fairly shortly, which will give you some in-depth guidance and tips on successfully searching for data. You'll also find further advice if you need it on how to register and then how to access and download the data once you've selected something you're interested in. All the information about the different types of data that we hold that I've discussed today, you can find all sorts of information on that as well. Also, importantly, on this page you can find out how you can get in touch with us. Now, right at the start I mentioned that as well as making all this fantastic data available, we offer a whole host of other services and resources. And this ranges from some of the how-to guides that we produce and make available on our website. So this might be guides about a specific data set. It might be a guide about a particular topic area, for example. We also have a number of different case studies that are available. And if you need any inspiration about what sort of research questions you could look at, then I'd highly recommend having a look at some of these case studies. We also produce video tutorials, and we have our very own YouTube channel. So if you go on to either the link which you can see on our screen, or if you just go onto YouTube and type in UK Data Service, that will bring up all of the video tutorials. And that's also an easy place to find recordings of all of the webinars that we've produced. So as I mentioned, today's webinar will find its way onto that YouTube channel next week. We have a range of different webinars, and some of those are introductory level and run throughout the year. But we also do some more specialist webinars. So for example, we have recently done one on using administrative data with Understand Society for education research. We've also had specialist ones on health data and ethnicity related data as well. And the recordings for those, as I say, will be on the YouTube channel. But we also have a number of face-to-face workshops. So from time to time we will go to universities and speak directly to students just to introduce them to the service. But we also have things like the Health Survey Users Conference each year. There's a Crime Survey Users one. And these generally take place in London. So keep an eye on our website just to have a look at any upcoming events that might be of interest to you. And the third resource that I really want to highlight is the User Support Help Desk. Now, whether you're new to data or whether you're an experienced researcher, there will come a time perhaps when you need some help with a query. And that could be about finding a suitable data source. It might be help in identifying an appropriate variable within a data set. It could be that you need some help in understanding the data once you've got it. So getting some advice on coding frames, for example. And it might be that you think you've spotted a problem or an anomaly that you're not sure about within a data set. And that's what the user support team are there for. Now, you can email us directly on support@ukdataservice.ac.uk, or you can have a look at this link, ukdataservice.ac.uk/help. And that will take you direct to the Contact Us page. And you can log your query there, and we will have a look at that and hopefully be able to provide some further guidance for you.